Do you guys post all of these after the event? Awesome. That's nice.
Hello, everyone. My name is Randy. I'm with the events team here at the University Bookstore in Seattle. We are very excited tonight. We will be presenting this book, The Whale Who Swam Through Time, and we have the author, Alex Boersma, with us, who co-written by Nick Pinson. Any books that we discuss tonight will be shown in our chat section. There is a Q&A link, so please, if you have any questions for the authors, feel free to put them in the Q&A link there. And this show is being recorded for future viewings on our YouTube channel. This is a really exciting book. It's about a whale that was born approximately 200 years ago, and it follows the whale on a magical journey through its life. Some of the things that people who were alive 200 years ago were Beethoven and Abraham Lincoln, Thomas Jefferson. It's beautifully illustrated. And the author, Alex Boersma, is a Canadian scientific illustrator living in Chicago. She studied geology and studio art at Vassar. She conducted research on whale evolution at the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History. Her articles have appeared in periodicals like the New York Times, BBC News, Nature, and Washington Post. Also joining us is Julia Kuo, who wrote this book, Let's Do Everything and Nothing. Julia is an author and illustrator. She has illustrated several picture books, including the bestseller Rise. She teaches illustration at several institutions. She has been an artist in residence at the Banff Centre for the Arts, and she was a 2019-2021 fellow with the Gray Center for the Arts and Inquiry at the University of Chicago. So, Alex and Julia, tell us about your books.
Julia, do you want to go first?
Oh, I didn't know I was talking about my book today. I'm really here to celebrate Alex's book. So I do have a book. It is available with you bookstore, but let's talk about Alex's beautiful book. And I would love if we could start with a reading of it.
Sure, yeah. So I'm here today to talk about The Whale Who Swam Through Time, which is a book that I co-wrote with Nick Pinson, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, but I will talk a little bit about him in our collaboration later. And The Whale Who Swam Through Time is a story of a bowhead whale, and bowhead whales are the longest living mammal in the world. They live over 200 years long. And our story follows a bowhead whale from when it was born in sort of the mid 19th century, and encountering explorers looking for the Northwest Passage and a relatively uninhabited Arctic. All the way through the present day, and sort of documenting all of the changes that happen in its environment throughout its lifetime. So I will go ahead and share the PDF as we do a little read through. Give me one moment here. All right. The Whale Who Swam Through Time, a 200-year journey in the Arctic. So our story starts about 200 years ago. This is a story about a whale who will live a very, very long time. She's not just any kind of whale, but a bowhead whale, the longest living mammal in the world. Bowheads are one of the few species of whales that live their whole lives in and around the Arctic. This is our bowhead here. And the two other species of whales that live in the Arctic as well are belugas, which you might be familiar with. They're very charismatic. And then narwhal as well, which are famous for these crazy unicorn-like tusks that they have. At this moment, she rests with her mother in the quiet, cold water. Occasionally, they encounter boats, some small and paddled, and others much bigger with many sails. The biggest ones come from half a world away, seeking a passage connecting the Atlantic to the Pacific. The whale finds their large forms peculiar, but they seem harmless. The whale is just a calf, a bit longer than a rowboat. Within the year, she'll leave her mother and set off on her own, but before then, she has some important bowhead skills to learn. Her mother shows her how to use her curved snout to break through the thick sea ice with a thundering pow. No longer nursing from her mother, the whale must learn how to feed herself. Instead of teeth, she has baleen, 2 walls of thick, long bristles on each side of her mouth. She uses her baleen to comb through the water, filtering out tiny critters to eat. Her favorite are copepods, which drift around the Arctic waters in dense orange clouds. As the years pass, she eats more and more and more, and she grows bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, almost 3 times longer and 25 years old, she is finally fully grown. The whale swims alone through a huge open ocean. As big as she is, it still makes her feel small. About 150 years ago, so 50 years have passed now, we see a little bit more human presence in the Arctic. Some ships coming in, and our whale is still off towards the right there. Each spring, the sea ice retreats and the whale migrates from open waters to a cozy bay. She calls to her calf, the 5th one she's had, and the sound travels easily in the calm water. Other kinds of whales spend their entire lives in communities, swimming, feeding, and singing together. Bowheads make their own way. They may travel together with other bowheads during the migration, but they don't stay together very long. During the voyage, the whale's blubber helps her float and store energy to nurse her calf. But her blubber also makes her a target for whalers who want to turn it into oil and food. They arrive in ships trailing black smoke, their engines filling the water with a rumble. It's louder than any noise the whale has ever heard, but she doesn't yet know to avoid the unfamiliar sound and the ships that make it. The whalers spot the whaling calf, and the crew launches rowboats to follow them. A man aims and shoots a harpoon at the whale's back, and narrowly misses. Alarmed, the whale and her calf dive deep, deep, deep down until the awful rumbling of the ship fades into the distance. About 50 years ago, so another 50 years have passed now. The whale has lived for over 100 years. Even so, she still has many decades ahead of her. The whalers left long ago, but harpoons have been traded for massive oil drills, creating a new danger for the whale. The Arctic is getting noisier. Noisier and busier. The ping of a submarine sonar, the roar of a cargo ship's propeller, the clang of an oil rig's machinery. Now the submarines aren't just at the surface, but below too. Submarines ply the ocean floor. Underwater, sound travels for many miles. Gone are the days of a quiet sea. In fact, all this noise makes it hard for her to hear her grandchildren. She can barely make out their voices, and she fears she'll never hear them again. Today. Day by day, month by month, year by year, the ocean is getting warmer. The whale is starting to know that it's less and less sea ice roofing her world. This new world brings new threats. Less ice means more open ocean and more ships with propeller blades that move too fast for whales to outswim. More ships also mean more oil spills. More plastics litter the ocean, looking like food but causing harm. And more fishing lines tangle around the flukes and flippers of whales. There's never been more peril or more people. Not all changes are bad though. A warmer Arctic brings more food and new whales. Most are friendly, but some are better avoided. So here we have a whole mixture of different whales. We have our bowhead here. We've got a fin whale, a couple humpbacks, a minke whale, 2 minke whales actually, all kind of swarming around a krill patch. And then these over here are orcas or killer whales, and you can see a rake mark on the tail stalk of the bowhead. The whale remembers when the world was calm, but the Arctic is changing faster and faster. She struggles to imagine what the world will be like for her great-grandchildren, 200 more years into a murky future. But bowheads are used to swimming through uncertain waters. And that's it. And there's a ton of fun back matter if you're into back matter. You can learn all sorts of things about bowheads, and then also lots of fun stuff about the Arctic in general. And then my favorite page is actually this one with all of the different Arctic critters. So if you spotted all those different Arctic creatures throughout the book, you can figure out who they are back here and then go back and flip back through and see if you can ID all of them.
I actually used this page to figure out the snow geese.
Oh yeah.
Spreads. I was like, wanted to assume that they were seagulls. And I was like, wait, we're in the Arctic. I can't be, you know, I can't be sure. Oh wait, look, here's an amazing
Perfect.
legend.
I'm good. I'm glad it was helpful.
Oh yeah, definitely. Okay, so Alex, this is just a really lovely book. I love how you use the device of time to tell this like really intricate story that weaves together the lives of these magnificent creatures with us, the humans that continue to disrupt their worlds on what seems to be a specific isolated incidents. And then like you have this third character, this, you know, much larger existential crisis of climate change. And it's, you know, it could be such a heavy topic, but I really appreciate the way that you left this glimmer of hope open at the end, because it's like, it's very important to be able to have some of that going forward. So, you know, I have so many things to ask you, like especially about your work, that the way that you got into this subject and almost have you know, firsthand knowledge of some of these places. But okay, I feel like I should kind of start at the beginning and ask you, I know that you co-wrote this book with Nick, and it's too bad that he can't be here today, but I'm not really familiar with how people co-write books, having only written by myself. So how does he really fit into the story of this, or is his name just stuck on there?
No, this was definitely throughout a very collaborative effort. Yeah, our first time kind of writing together as well. So we also were throughout the whole process kind of figuring out how to do this. And this was also a total pandemic project. So, you know, we started this during the pandemic, we finished it during the pandemic. So we also did the whole process remote, and we never saw each other the whole time we were working on the book. So it was all a learning process for us. Yeah, I guess sort of backtracking to our history a little bit. I actually first met Nick when I was back in university. So a little bit about Nick first, I guess. So Nick is the, let me actually share some images while we talk about this, because Nick's work is so cool, it deserves to be shown in images. So give me one moment here. All right. So that's Nick over there. Hi, Nick. And Nick is the curator of fossil marine mammals at the Smithsonian Natural History Museum in DC. And so he spends all of his time thinking about and working on whales. And that work really varies from, you know, traveling around and actually tagging whales to see what they do underwater, to digging up fossils of extinct whales to learn more about their evolution. Yeah, using drones to sort of try to get a better sense of what they're doing from just a different point of view. So, I actually met Nick when I was back in college, and I was looking for internships, and somehow got in contact with Nick through, I think, a series of cold emails, and yeah, started off as an intern in his lab, working on him specifically on sort of whale evolution stuff. And then when I graduated, I was lucky enough that he invited me to come back and work at the museum for a little bit. So we really started working together in a research capacity. And as we were studying these extinct whales and publishing papers on them, Nick kind of knew I had this artistic background as well, and really encouraged me to use it to illustrate these extinct species that we were studying and kind of show what they would have looked like when they were alive. So that was my first little foray into scientific illustration, and it really quickly became my favorite part of the job. I was like, research is great, but really just let me draw these whales. So I went back to school and did a master's in scientific illustration. And then when I graduated, Nick became one of my first clients in a scientific illustration capacity instead. So throughout, he's been a really great, just, the best collaborator and mentor and supporter of what I've been doing in whatever capacity that I could have asked for. And the first kind of scientific illustration job that he hired me for was actually illustrating this book that he wrote called Spying on Whales, which is all about all the amazing work that he does at the Smithsonian, and about because of all of this research, what we know about whales and what that might tell us about how whales will fare in the future. So that was a really long answer to your question, but yeah, I mean, I guess your question was really more about what it was like to work together. And the answer is really just fun. We've worked together in so many different capacities over the years that I think it was relatively easy for us to find our groove in working together in this new capacity, even though it was totally remote, which was an added challenge. But just a lot of, email drafts back and forth and making little changes and long phone calls and nitpicking over specific wording, and both of us trying to dial back our inclinations to want to include every little like cool tidbit about whales. But yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so that does explain a lot to me. I think that it's so special to have these types of collaborators, usually more cross-disciplinary, for illustrators. I've had like one or two people in my life who are more on the writing end, who I've been able to collaborate with in like several different ways. And this sounds just like that. It's so like special to be able to come in contact with these people and like get to see what iterations of work can come out.
Totally. Yeah, I feel like that's where the most interesting stuff comes out of, cross-disciplinary collaborations like that, I think. So
yeah. So, okay, I think it's really fascinating that you've approached whales from a purely research standpoint and also a scientific illustration one. So it's like already two kind of adjacent areas, but then now you have a third pronged, like, from picture books, right? And so like as an illustrator, this is already a niche area to be an illustrator, and then to be a scientific illustrator or to be a medical illustrator is even further into that specializing. I know you mentioned you went back to school for it, and like for those who don't know, this is usually a more technical way of doing illustration because it involves accuracy, because our products are usually used for science journals or publications. And so it is a little bit more rare and special for Alex to be doing to be a scientific illustrator and also to do picture books. But like we said, the most interesting things come out of these adjacent areas. So having done scientific illustration, I've seen that you've done various types of work for different clients. It has to be different for picture books. So do you feel like your scientific illustration work changed, or like changed how you approached a picture book, or you're able to bring something from that field into it?
Well, I think it made it a lot easier just, because a lot of my clients doing my scientific illustration work have ended up being scientists in marine disciplines, just because, it kind of snowballs, right? You get one client who does marine stuff and then another client because they see that work. So I'm very comfortable with drawing whales and kind of marine situations at this point. So I think it made it a lot easier. but it also was just, I think, especially fun because, yeah, kind of like you were saying, there are certain sort of conventions to scientific illustration. You're always, for the most part, trying to show something as clearly as possible or as simply, and like, yeah, you're always trying to, yeah, clarity is a really major factor, sometimes above aesthetics or like pure sort of like style, which is something that I'm always kind of trying to push back on, but it was very freeing to, yeah, draw some of this subject matter that I'm very familiar and comfortable with, but have the sort of, sorry, I'm just gonna flip through to some, I guess this is sort of what I'm talking about, but have the freedom to, yeah, kind of change those priorities a bit and, focus a lot more on style or focus on things like, one of the things I was really having fun with in this book was showing the bowhead from some really weird angles. So, we're so used to seeing drawings of whales just like straight from the side because it shows you the most about the whale. It's kind of is the most descriptive view of the animal. But as I was working on this book and sort of figuring out different ways I could show the whale, it just like really popped out to me just how weird they look from the front. Like all of a sudden you're like, what is this like weird blob creature? So, like this view in the middle and also this view where it's feeding from the front, and also this view from the side, they just, yeah, I was deriving a lot of pleasure from showing some of these more unusual viewpoints of bowheads, especially just because they are an animal, whales in general, I guess, that are just especially hard to photograph and especially hard to get video footage as well. So these viewpoints really aren't something that we have images of really. So it was, yeah, kind of it was fun, and it was also kind of a challenge to, yeah, get some of these viewpoints in different positions, and yeah, did in a lot of ways feel very different from my scientific illustration work. So
okay, so I feel like that's fascinating, and I have two directions I kind of want to go with that. But while we're starting from where you left off, okay, so this book sits at the cross section of a couple topics that require accuracy, like not just the scientific illustration of the whale, or not just the accuracy of the whale, but also like historically over this 200-year span. So I know, having done some historic picture books, how much research that takes. I also know how hard it is to draw figures where you're not completely familiar with how they look in a 360 view. And so what you're just describing, like, I understand how challenging that can be. How did you make sure that what you were doing was accurate?
Well, it's one of the great things about working with scientists is that I could do something and be like, does this look right? Because, Nick has a much better idea than I do, having, specifically studied a lot of anatomy and seen a lot of these whales in life, and yeah, just has a really good sense of whether things are anatomically correct. So that's, it's great having a scientist to work with, and it's something that I've definitely come to rely on. But the historical element was a new thing for both of us a little bit. I think, Nick has a little bit more kind of historical knowledge of the Arctic, but there definitely was a lot of, we basically had, kind of three timelines that we had to fit together. We had the bowhead's biological timeline, we had the history of the Arctic timeline, and then I guess you can sort of think of like just the flow of the narrative as another timeline, and how to kind of, yeah, make all of those match up in an accurate way. So the number of times we went back and forth on, what those different, so we jumped every 50 years in the story, and the number of times we kind of went back and forth and we're like, does that actually work? And we had to sort of tweak specific words to kind of get the timelines to actually kind of match up. Yeah, that was that was a lot of just sort of like going back and forth, and yeah, making sure that it all was accurate, because that's something that is very important to both Nick and I. So yeah,
Yeah, I
but
mean, you know, like I know that I just watched a documentary about, you know, the people in the living in the Arctic like recently, and you know there is plenty of footage for what these towns look like now, but I'm sure that when you get to source material for 200 years ago, it is the same photographs after a certain point, right? And so
yeah,
did you
totally.
find that that was like enough for you to work off of?
Yeah, I mean, I ended up doing a lot of research, like that viewpoint that we return to multiple times in the book of this sort of like Arctic scene throughout the years. I did sort of very loosely base it on a real place, but I also wanted it to feel as sort of like vaguely Arctic in as it could, so that it didn't you know, it wasn't limiting in terms of the narrative that we were telling. So yeah, it was a lot of pulling from many different Arctic sources and saying like, okay, so this is the general picture of what the Arctic looked like at that time, and how can I sort of cobble together yeah, an accurate or looking sort of representation of what that would have looked like.
Yeah, that's like the
Yeah.
beauty of that's, you know, that's why illustration has a place outside of photographs, is because we can communicate this.
Absolutely,
So
yeah.
yeah, so you actually, I was really curious. So you were talking about, you were kind of differentiating between what you had to do for scientific illustration, and you specifically use the word clarity above aesthetics versus picture books. And it's really interesting because when you were saying that, I felt like they had some similar purposes in communication, right? So it's less so accuracy and more communication. And so it made me think about how I really like the sensibility that you use throughout the book. I can see that it's different than the style that you use for your other books. But you have this like really lovely use of design, and the animals strike a really nice balance of like approachable and still like, you know, respectfully accurate, but not dry. You know, even the plastic litter and the oil spill are kind of beautiful. So like what, you know, I understand, as someone who switches styles, like it's always so fun at the beginning of of a project to be like, what am I going to do with this, and how am I going to draw it? Like, so what went into that kind of thought process for you?
Well, first off, I'm so glad that you think I struck that balance of
Oh
sort of,
yeah.
yeah, you know, accurate, but still sort of, yeah, approachable. And so thank you. Yeah, going into this book, you know, a lot of my sort of choices about kind of medium and style were a little selfish, just because, you know, like I said, kind of working on this book felt a little bit freeing, and it felt like all of a sudden I could, you know, yeah, be a little bit more loose with my style, even though I don't think the illustrations ended up seeing that loose, but loose for me. And and one of the things I wanted to do, really just for myself more than anything, was to do it fully analog. So to do, you know, the artwork fully on paper. Partially just because I really like working analog, and I don't always get to do it in my scientific illustration work, just because you know, sometimes the turnaround is pretty fast, and sometimes they need changes last minute. So I try to work analog as much as possible, and even when I'm doing my scientific illustration work, I'll sort of split the workflow. So it'll be, you know, a pencil drawing that I end up coloring digitally, or a pen ink drawing, but then it gets put into a layout that's done digitally.
Right.
Just because it's what I enjoy doing. But so yeah, working on this book and having, you know, a little bit longer than I usually have, and having a little bit more control over the look of the kind of overall project, I really wanted to indulge in doing it fully analog. Yeah, so that was a huge part of the decision making, was just like, I want it to be analog. And I'm really glad I did. You know, the satisfaction of seeing this like stack of paintings at the end was really exciting. But yeah, in terms of actual kind of the specific style we ended up landing on, I do work in a few different styles. And one of the nicest things about working on this project in general was just having a team to work with. Because, you know, usually when I'm doing my scientific illustration work, it's me and the client and that's it. And, you know, they're kind of telling me what they want, but they don't tend to weigh in too much on the style or,
Okay.
so it was so nice having an editor and an art director and people to offer feedback and to weigh in on what style we ended up going with, because I do work in a bunch of styles. So I kind of was like, I could do all these things. What do you think? And they really, yeah, the team at Roaring Brook really helped me sort of like pick which direction to bring it in, which was really fun. So yeah, they had a good deal to do with deciding what which way we went with it. Yeah. So
Yeah, no, I like hearing that. So we actually share the same team that we worked with for the book that I just came out with, Let's Do Everything Nothing. And then actually a previous book from 2020, it's Connie's team at Roaring Brook. And so it's funny because as you were saying that, I was like thinking about how much they weighed in on the art. And it was like kind of like on an as needed basis. And so I was thinking, oh, like for the next one with Connie, should I get her more involved? It sounds
what should I do, Connie?
I know. But right, it's really, you know, I also do editorial work too. And while it is a kind of maybe your scientific illustration work can be editorial, right? Especially those with tighter timelines. But they are so vastly different in terms of execution and revision and turnaround time. So, you know, I think that a big part of what makes the book process now feel different to me is writing. You know, like I think that having illustrated many books before, like there is kind of this, it's like a pure problem solving thing, right? Like there is text or there is a concept that I need to visually amplify. And I found that once I started writing my own books, it became a very different experience. Did you feel this way?
Yeah, I didn't really anticipate it, but you're totally right. Yeah, it's a very different thing. So we basically wrote the text first, which this is our first time doing a picture book. So I'm like, maybe everyone does that. Maybe that's the way it's always done. But, and then the illustrations came basically once the text was like almost finalized. But throughout writing the text, I was definitely already constantly being like, okay, but if I write it this way, then maybe I can illustrate it this way. And it's like, yeah, it's a very integrated process. Yeah, so I would love to illustrate some other people's books just to see kind of how that changes. And I anticipate it would be more kind of like my scientific illustration work, where like you're just kind of given something to build on. But yeah, it was actually really fun to kind of, like I said, I mean, the whole project was just so fun. I've never done something where you really get to be involved in every step of the process in that way. And that's, for the sort of control freak in me, is very satisfying. So
I mean, it's perfect for the person who knows what they want to do with it.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. You know, okay, so I feel like I've been dying to ask you about the outdoors element of your life that led to this. So as a fellow outdoorsy person, I spend so much of my daydreaming time in the outdoors, and I've been able to integrate some of it into my work. But there's kind of, you know, this idea that there's kind of a lack of expectation that you could really integrate those two things. So hearing that you were once an adventure guide, that you've not only kayaked in the Arctic, but you've also guided trips up there, just like rings these alarm bells in my mind instantly, that we are not talking about like a simple tourist, like novice level, that you are very seasoned and that you know what you're doing. And these are skills that don't come to many people so early on, especially those who live in landlocked Chicago. So it's a whole different level of competency. And just please tell me how you got into it. Like how did you get there? And, you know, I'm I'm sure that like went into the book just as much as your collaboration with Nick, but I would love to hear about it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I've never really thought about it too much, but I think my love of the outdoors and you know, my desire to basically always be outdoors, I think is kind of what pushed me towards science in the first place. I had kind of done art my whole life, and you know, coming out of university, thought I was going to do kind of artistic stuff or like humanities or something. And I was in university, I was trying to figure out what I was going to major in, and someone pointed out to me, I don't know who it was, but someone pointed out to me like, oh, like you're always curious about like your environment and like the world, like, you know, nature around you, and like wondering how these landforms came to be and whatever, like that's science, like you should be doing science. So yeah, I think that kind of love of the outdoors is kind of what guided me down this track. But it started, I always went to, so I grew up in Toronto. I basically lived in landlocked places my entire life, which is kind of funny that a lot of my work is marine related now. But I grew up going to camps, to overnight camps in the summer, and did that for years and years and years. And at some point got bored of just being at the camp. So I started doing this sort of trips that they would offer, whitewater canoeing and hiking trips and things like that. And then when I got into sort of late high school, my uncle actually worked for a outdoor guiding company called Black Feather in Canada, and he got me into their sort of like apprentice guide program. So I did that for a year, and then I started guiding for them. And they're great. They do trips kind of all across Ontario, and they do trips all over the world now, but mostly kind of in Ontario and the Canadian Arctic, and I think they do like Baja and all over the place. But so I worked for them for a couple of years doing whitewater canoeing and sea kayaking trips. And the sea kayaking is what took me up to the Arctic, which is still one of my most amazing experiences of my life. I'm losing track of what the original question was.
It's okay. Well, I can keep that going. So, you know, I know that you went to Baffin Island, and Baffin Island is a place I'm familiar with only because I watched so many outdoors documentaries and like crazy, you know, they're always like this, like people who go on these expeditions that are like, seem like they will fail, but these people scrape through with like, and they make it out with much less body fat.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Basically. Yeah, I mean, so yeah, the one trip that I did up in the Arctic left from Pond Inlet, which is, on the northern tip of Baffin Island. And it kind of, we just did like a sort of 2-week loop sort of around that area, and then ended back in Pond Inlet and kind of headed out from there. And it is just the most surreal landscape. You know, I have never been anywhere that feels as remote and as quiet and serene, and also barren, and a little scary just in how sort of vast it feels. But yeah, I feel extremely fortunate having had that opportunity, because I think so few people get that opportunity to go to the Arctic. You know, it's so far from where most of us spend our whole lives. Yeah, it just really, I think, broadened my ideas of kind of what places can be like and what lives can be like. Yeah, I would love to go back.
So did you see bow whales while you were there?
So we saw one bowhead from like very far off. Like we just saw its blow. Every whale has a very specific blow, depending on how their blowholes are shaped. It produces a different blow. So bowheads have this sort of like V-shaped blow. Okay. So we saw one from very far away. Okay. But we did see a ton of narwhal, which was incredible. Amazing. Just like, because they travel in these pods. So bowheads, like we said in the book, mostly spend their time alone, but narwhal travel in these huge, huge pods. So yeah, we saw, I think a few different pods, and they just kind of stretch out across the whole like surface
amazing.
of the water. And it's just this sort of like frothing, like tumultuous, expansive, and you just see kind of narwhal backs and tusks
Whoa. Oh, you
occasionally
see
kind
like
of
the little
erupting.
points. Okay.
Yeah, it was yeah, pretty crazy. And they're just such mysterious creatures, narwhals especially. I feel like we know so little about them, and there's such a mystique with their tusk especially that makes us think of them as these kind of unreal creatures. I think a lot of people actually just think narwhal aren't real, just
Along
because
with
they have that sort
unicorns.
of, yeah.
Right.
But they are, and they're beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think I do feel like the public has grown to have a fascination with narwhals, and
Mhm.
also the world has grown to have an interest in the Arctic, right? As the sea
I hope
ice
so, yeah.
melts and as pathways clear for shipping, it's become this more and more contested area, and like it's the site of like trillions of dollars of potential expansion, right?
Mhm.
And so I know that underneath your book there is this underlying message of wanting to compel the reader to care, because that is kind of like the first step towards conservation. Can you talk about what else you might what you kind of envision that people would take away from the book?
Yeah, I think we were really hoping, like I said, the Arctic is just, it seems like such a faraway place because most of us will never go there. And it's not a place that, yeah, we maybe think about very often. So I think we really just, yeah, wanted to hopefully make people think and feel about the Arctic as a real place, and sort of offer these little glimpses and bits of specificity to it as a place that hopefully will allow people to yeah, keep it a little bit more present in their minds, and just think about how climate change is affecting other places, other parts of the globe that yeah, you may never have the chance to see. Yeah. And I think, I've been up the Arctic, and I should mention as well, so has Nick. He's done some research out of Alaska, specifically on bowhead whales. So I think we both, yeah, feel pretty strongly about what a special place it is. And yeah, I think my goal is really just to hopefully give a little bit of specificity and sort of concrete feeling to it as a place throughout the book. So
Yeah, I think that's like a really, there is really no other way to compel people to have an attachment, for a place, and to eventually be a steward of it, right? Because it all comes back to our very human attachments.
yeah.
So, okay, so I just love the intersection of all your interests and your skills. Like I can see how they manifested themselves into this book. Like this book is so much the baby of your time and your knowledge. And so that makes me wonder, like, I wonder what she would do next. Like, what else would you explore?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, coming out of scientific illustration world and still being in scientific illustration world, I am really interested in these sort of stories that are rooted in science, and kind of tell specific narratives about doing science, but also what science can tell us about the world, and how it's changing. And I definitely have a soft spot for deep time and for imagining kind of past versions of our world. So those are definitely all kind of topics that I think there are a lot of really great stories to be told from those kind of worlds. I also just really like working with scientists. So Nick and I are definitely scheming up more projects together, but I would also love to keep, potentially working on more picture books with scientists, and trying to, I think scientists have so many great stories, and they have really specific viewpoints on topics that a lot of us, I think, know about and love, but maybe don't have that sort of detailed knowledge about, or don't really have the full picture. So yeah, I would definitely like to keep working with scientists, and yeah, just keep exploring all of the amazing little corners and creatures of our crazy varied world. So
yeah, no, I definitely feel you. I didn't have this experience until this past year, but I wrote a book on bioluminescence based on my own experiences, but I consulted with a scientist from Mbari who happens to have spent his life researching bioluminescence. He was so accommodating that it was a very fruitful collaboration. And even though it's just my name, I see him as basically the collaborator on this book, because so much of it came from, like you said, like drawing something and asking him, does this look right? Learning from him that many images of what we see when we Google bioluminescent creatures are dead specimen.
Yeah,
not the
that like just collapse when they're out of the water. Yeah.
Right, exactly. I actually have I don't know if you can see that. That's like a stuffy of a jeweled squid that is actually based off of a dead specimen. Like they're only that grayish pink when they're dead. Yeah, and I bought it because that was so funny to me. This little jewel of a factoid from this scientist. And I think, this like science illustration collaboration area is so fascinating. So
scientists they like talking about their work. So it's
right. And like, we have a means of disseminating the work even further, which I think is really special.
Oh, I'm so excited to grab your bioluminescence book. That sounds awesome.
Oh yeah. It'll be out later this year, but I think through that I can appreciate the journey that you had and see why you want to continue doing that, even though you probably could just author things on your own. I could see why like you don't want to give up the collaboration.
Yeah, I think so much of my work is just on my own, that now finding this way in which I can work with people is very exciting. So it's hard. It'll be hard to give that up, but who knows?
Yeah,
we'll see.
Absolutely.
Oh, great. There's the link for your luminescence book. Exciting.
Oh, I didn't even know that was up. Right.
Yay.
Yeah.
Cool.
So I just wanted to thank you for talking about this and just say that I'm such a fan. I would love to, I would love to follow you up on one of your guided trips and draw you at work. But then you would be drawing too. So
we can all draw. It's all good. Right. Thank you, Julia. That was amazing.
Thank you.
So Alex, some of your topics, they're just so interesting. I just have some follow-up questions if you don't mind. So you have a background in geology, which I think is really interesting. Did that give you an increased awareness of some environmental issues, or how did that discipline play into your creation of this book? My background in geology is kind of what got me working with Nick in the first place, because paleontology, so studying extinct creatures, actually falls under geology, strangely enough, because fossils are really rocks. So it definitely it was definitely the starting point for all of this, for my research and for my science illustration work and for collaborations with scientists. It kind of all started there. And I think studying geology really, like I said, it gave me that appreciation for deep time and for thinking in terms of timescales that are so much bigger than what we're used to thinking in. And, we keep talking about how the timescale of this book is long, like 200 years, but like that seems like nothing compared to like some of the timescales that I've grown to think in on the scale of millions and millions and billions of years. So, I think it's kind of just changed my perspective and made me, just really curious about how our planet has changed so much and how it could continue to change so much. So, and as you're going through your book, I read your book, and you pointed out something that I actually missed the first time around, and that is these rake marks that you you pointed out. How did the whale get those rake marks? What?
Yeah, so those are from orca teeth. So you can see that one orca that looks kind of happy, but really it's a little bit a little bit threatening. So yeah, researchers have found lots of whales with those specific rake marks that are made by orca teeth, where an animal has been lucky enough to be attacked by a podden orca and make it away. And yeah, they heal into these really specific scars that are very identifiable. Yeah, orcas are very cool and very beautiful and very scary. But
So one of the things when I read your book that I thought was absolutely fascinating that I had never thought about, of course, you know, I'm aware of the plastics and many of the consumer goods that we use are harmful to the oceans, but the sound pollution that you mentioned, for me, when I hear, you know, sounds, construction, traffic, that may be an irritant, but they're not going to affect how I eat or, you know, how I find my family. But here, clearly, you know, for all those sounds, a cargo ship's propeller, an oil rig's machinery, a submarine sonar, these go on 24 hours a day as these ships keep going by. That affects a whale, doesn't it? Or it can affect the whale's ability to their own systems for finding their own young, finding food. Is that correct?
Yeah. So yeah, it's just it's a very different type of life that we have to kind of imagine when we're thinking about whales kind of living in this aquatic environment where sound travels way, way further than it does above water on land. And on top of that, not only do whales use sound to communicate, but they also use it to navigate and, like you said, feed. And it plays a much more integral role in their ability to live and do all the things they need to survive. So, so yeah, I think definitely changes to that acoustic environment, really kind of dramatic changes that that are occurring, you know, in the global oceans, but also in the Arctic, can have a really detrimental effect on whales, and really kind of change their behavior and their movement patterns and all sorts of things. So it's a hard thing for us to kind of imagine what that must be like, and it really, yeah, stretches the imagination. But yeah.
Now here's an interesting thing that you know, we were talking about how a whale can live over 200 years. And the first part I understood, you know, when they found some remains and they found the type of tools or you know, things that hunting tools that were used and the whale survived, and they said, wow, this whale, those are tools from 100 years ago. So we knew they lived at least 100 years. But then you talked about something that kind of a little bit escaped me, and that is to find out they lived over 200 years. You talked about proteins in the eyeballs or something. Can you just elaborate on that?
It's a weird thing. And this is where I would be like, Nick, you take this one, because you could explain it in much more detail than I can. But essentially there's a lens in the eyeball that is composed of these proteins that that have chemicals in them that degrade at a really at a measurable rate. So it basically functions like a biological clock. It's basically, as those proteins degrade, you can kind of measure them and figure out how long that lens has existed, aka how long that animal has been alive. So they've done research, you know, looking at these lenses of multiple different bowhead individuals. And I think the oldest one they found was like 211 years old. I think it was a male or something. And that's just, you know, one sample that they happened to get the oldest. So that suggests that, you know, there's probably whales that are even older than that as well. Yeah, pretty wild.
I kind of can't believe that that's the basis upon which we are dating the, like, are there other, now, you know, with all of our like the way that we tag so many, you know, animals and like living specimen, is that going to change the way that we date these creatures?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. Yeah, so what Randy was talking about, the first clue that bowheads live for so long were indigenous peoples in the Arctic. They've kind of known
Sure.
known before we were studying this. And yeah, Inupiat peoples in the Alaska, I think there are records of them saying that bowhead whales live for 2 lifetimes. And then after that, the second piece of evidence was an arrowhead, a stone arrowhead that was found embedded in a whale, I think in like the late 1900s, like 1990 something. They found this arrowhead embedded in a bowhead that was made of a material that kind of fell out of favor in the 1880s or so. So that suggested that that arrowhead was over 100 years old, and the whale must have been at least, mature to survive that attack. So that means the whale must have been, 30 years old. So I think they estimated the whale was like 130 or something. And then the eyeball proteins was kind of the last, the last piece of evidence. So yeah, I'm not sure kind of what will be the next source of intel. But yeah, I feel like as technology just keeps advancing, there's just more and more cool things that we're learning about these animals that for so long have remained mysterious because they're so hard to study without all this technology.
I love that the indigenous people knew all along.
Yeah, they knew first. But yeah, I think, all the ways that they're studying whales now, like drones and tags, and one researcher that I've worked with, who's also a friend of Nick's out at Stanford, Jeremy Goldbogen, they put a tag on a blue whale and were able to actually measure its heartbeat, which was wild, as it dove down to the bottom of the ocean. And they made really cool discoveries about how that heartbeat slows as they dive deeper and deeper to the point where their heartbeat beats maybe like twice a minute or something like that. So yeah, this technology is just really kind of like blowing the lid off of whale science, I feel like.
So to close this evening, I'd like to read just a little bit from your book, just a short paragraph from your author's note. The changes in the Arctic that our whale experiences, increases in shipping traffic, oil drilling, reduced sea ice, are just a small part of the larger global story of human activity driving climate change. Even remote parts of the world aren't immune to these effects. We think that learning how humans have changed a bowhead whale's world empowers readers, young and old, and helps us become better ancestors. Alex and Julia, I thank you very much for a great conversation. The book is The Whale Who Swam Through Time by Alex Boersma and Nick Pineson. And there it is. Thank you both so much. And I want to thank everybody out there for joining us. Have a great Memorial Day weekend. You can check out this book on our website at ubookstore.com. And thank you very much. We'll see you again soon.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.